Hello, everybody. I am Jax James, NORML State Policy Manager, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about a couple things. We have some ballot initiative news in several states, so a few updates to give you guys. Also, some information about Smoke the Vote in preparation for early voting and the November election. Additionally, I want to touch on a little bit of legislation that is still moving in certain states. So let's get right into it. I will first start off with an update. Oh, let me say though, I always want to know where you guys are coming from so that I can look up anything that might be in your state. So please comment below where you're watching from and we can see what might be going on near you. So let's start with ballot update for you guys. So first of all, I'll start with Arkansas. So advocates behind a proposed ballot measure to legalize adult use marijuana sales were dealt a significant setback when the Arkansas election officials rejected certifying the measure for the November ballot. The Board of Election Commissioners voted to deny the measure's proposed ballot title, opining that it does not accurately reflect the true scope of the initiative and that some elements of the proposal might be confusing to voters. Advocates have now taken the matter to the state Supreme Court and are expected to have a decision as early as next week. Just so you guys know, this effort in Arkansas is a constitutional amendment which seeks to establish a state-licensed retail cannabis market for those that are 21 and up. It also seeks to expand the state's existing medical cannabis access program by increasing the total number of licensed dispensaries and eliminating certain taxes. Let's go to Missouri. A circuit court judge dismissed a legal challenge that sought to remove Missouri's legal question from the November ballot. The judge determined that the plaintiff in the suit, who works for a Virginia-based community anti-drug coalition of America, did not have standing to challenge the initiative because she failed to provide sufficient evidence of residency. Further, the judge opined that the plaintiff's challenge lacked merit, finding that all of the measure's provisions related to regulating cannabis and therefore did not violate the state's single subject rule. The judge also determined that the Secretary of State acted properly when it counted and validated the signatures provided by the campaign's proponent, Legal Missouri 22. In recent years, legalization opponents have frequently been turning to these type of challenges in their efforts to overturn either election results or prevent voters from deciding on marijuana legalization questions. Recently, NORML's Deputy Director Paul Armentano even authored an op-ed on this, and I wanted to share with you something that Paul said. He said, with public support for marijuana policy reform reaching supermajority status in recent years, prohibitionists and other political opponents have largely abandoned efforts to try and influence public opinion. Rather, they are now relying on gamesmanship to prevent voters from weighing in on this issue. In some cases, they are even willing to overturn the will of the electorate to get their way. Whether or not one person supports or opposes cannabis legalization, these cynical and undemocratic tactics ought to be a cause for deep concern. You got to always love Paul. He's very articulate, but verbose at the same time in his statements, and I absolutely agree with it. And to let you guys know, in Missouri, this measure would allow adults to possess 3 ounces of cannabis and purchase from licensed retailers. You can also cultivate up to 6 flowering and 6 immature plants and 6 clones. It also establishes a program to automatically review and expunge criminal records for nonviolent marijuana-related offenses, among some other changes in the law. I see you guys are commenting where you're from over here. Maryland, I'm going to talk about what you guys have going on over there soon. Washington State, Illinois, Iowa. All right, awesome. Welcome, everybody. So next I want to touch on Oklahoma. So SQ 820 is sponsored by the New Approach PAC and would allow 21 and older to possess and purchase up to 1 ounce of cannabis and grow up to 6 mature plants with 6 seedlings for personal use. The measure also provides pathways to resentencing and expungement of criminal records. So after regulators failed to verify proponents' signatures in a timely manner, officials argued that there was insufficient time to include the question on the November printed ballots. Campaign organizers turned to the Supreme Court for relief. The court had to allow a 10-day challenge period where 4 challenges have been filed. The court will decide on these 4 challenges and then on the status of the initiative being printed upon the ballot. So stay tuned for Oklahoma. The end of the 10-day period was yesterday. So that's when we did find that there were 4 challenges filed. So we will follow up with you guys there. Now, other efforts that will be on the ballot in Maryland, there will be question 4, which will ask, do you favor the legalization of the use of cannabis by an individual who is at least 21 years of age or older on or after July 1st in the state of Maryland? State lawmakers also approved complementary legislation that defines possession limits, facilitates automatic review and expungement of records, and if approved by voters, adults will be able to possess 1.5 ounces of cannabis or 12 grams of concentrates at the beginning of July in 2023. Lawmakers would still have to go back and enact certain additional legislative items next session so that they could establish rules and regulations governing this marketplace. So now let's talk about North Dakota and South Dakota. So New Approach North Dakota's ballot initiative seeks to legalize the adult use and sale of cannabis. If approved, it would allow 21 and up to possess 1 ounce of cannabis and cultivate 3 plants in their home. It would also establish retail cannabis stores, product manufacturers, testing laboratories, and other types of cannabis businesses. It also would direct regulators to establish and implement rules for the program by October 1, 2023. Now, in South Dakota, if you've been tuning in, for a second consecutive election, voters in South Dakota will decide on a ballot measure to legalize cannabis for 21 and up. Representatives for the group South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws said that the Secretary of State had confirmed that advocates secured the ballot access through signatures and will be on the November ballot. It will be called Initiated Measure 27, and it would permit adults to possess 1 ounce of cannabis, cultivate 3 mature plants, and transfer without remuneration limited amounts of quantities of cannabis. Excuse me. The measure does not seek to establish a regulatory framework, however, and that would be something that would have to be continued to be addressed. So some upcoming local efforts, as you guys have seen, we're starting to see local efforts happening having to do with decriminalization, legalization, repealing bans on sales in certain areas. And recently in Denver, there was an effort to do a dramatic increase on taxes in Denver. We talked with Colorado NORML and some other groups in the area and worked to push back on this. And fortunately, it has been withdrawn. So people in Denver, that effort has been halted and withdrawn from the ballot. So you don't have to worry about that. In Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, we have been working with older people there on an initiative to depenalize possession and basically take the fine from $160 to $500 down to $1. And there is going to be a meeting on that on the 20th. So stay tuned there if you live in Wisconsin. Now, some other items that will be on the ballot in November. One is going to be in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and it has to do with deciding on a pair of ordinances. The first will determine whether or not the city will allow existing medical cannabis dispensaries to transition into adult use retailers, therefore repealing the ban on retail market there. The second asks voters to approve a 5% local tax on sales involving adult use marijuana products. There's also an effort that we oppose in Lapeer, Michigan. Voters in Lapeer will decide on a ballot measure that seeks to repeal the city's existing marijuana regulations. If passed, it would likely shut down the city's currently operating dispensaries. Another effort in Michigan, in Petoskey, the voters of Petoskey will decide on a municipal ordinance that seeks to overturn the city's existing ban on the establishment of adult use cannabis retail stores. If passed, it will call upon lawmakers to provide for standards and procedures to permit and regulate such establishments in the city. In Montana, in Granite County, voters will be able to decide on 3 marijuana-related initiatives. One measure, if approved, would repeal the county-wide moratorium prohibiting adult use marijuana sales within the county lines. The other 2 measures have to do with local taxes. Now, in Ohio, over the better part of the past decade, voters in over 24 Ohio municipalities have decided in favor of local ballot measures that depenalize activities involving the personal possession of marijuana. There's efforts by Sensible Movement Coalition and NORML Appalachia that have petitioned to place a question before the voters that would eliminate these penalties. And voters in Corning, Helena, Hemlock, Kent, Laurelville, Rushville, and Shawnee will all be able to vote on this in November. Now, in Rhode Island, as you guys probably recall this year, state lawmakers legalized adult use marijuana market. It was back in May, and the law provides that localities have the ability to weigh in on whether or not to permit or prohibit licensed marijuana markets in their communities. So an effort in over 30 cities will be on the ballot in Election Day. Voters will decide yes or no on the following question. Will new cannabis-related licenses be issued in that municipality to businesses involved in cultivation, manufacturing, laboratory testing, and retailing of adult use recreational cannabis? Communities that vote no will not be eligible to receive any revenue generated from state licensed marijuana sales. Now, in my state of Texas, as you guys know, the only way to change marijuana laws in Texas is through the legislature, which meets every 2 years for 140 days. However, localities have used discretion by implementing first chance programs and diversion programs across the state. For cities that are home rule cities, they can also pass any regulations or laws deemed necessary unless it is specifically prohibited by state law. So Ground Game Texas is working in several home rule cities across Texas to depenalize the personal possession of cannabis. In fact, earlier this year, voters in my home city of Austin, Texas, overwhelmingly approved this ballot initiative called Prop A, which depenalized possession and also prohibited police from executing no-knock warrants. So coming up in November, those who live in Denton, Elgin, Harker Heights, Killeen, and San Marcos are going to also be able to vote on these types of initiatives, hopefully expanding the number of Texans who don't have to deal with their local law enforcement penalizing them for personal possession. However, it is of note that any state DPS or any sheriffs would still likely arrest you in the area. So, these are some things to keep in mind that can be an issue when we have, this patchwork of policy across a certain state. So let me come back over to the comments over here and see if you guys have any questions that I can answer real quick. Also got some people from North Carolina and England even. Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Illinois, Iowa, Pennsylvania. Okay, so Pennsylvania, you still have legislation going. I'm going to cover some of that in just a minute. We've got some people from Kentucky, Florida. Okay, Steve from Wisconsin. You've got that Wauwatosa city council hearing next week. So share with any friends that you have there. All right, cool. So I'm going to come back over to my handy dandy action alert spreadsheet and talk to you guys about the states that still have legislation pending. So as you know, it's kind of a cycle across the states where you have your legislative session and then your election cycle, and then you come back to legislative session. But there are just a handful of states that are still in session and have bills that they are addressing right now. For example, in Pennsylvania, So first of all, let me tell you how you can take action on these. You can go to norml.org/act and you just scroll a little bit down till you see the dynamic map of the country, and you hover over your state and you can see if there are any active bills there. So if you live in Pennsylvania, go to norml.org/act, hover over Pennsylvania, and you'll see that there's legislation having to do with home grow, legalization, some that we oppose, stripping patient protections, also legislation having to do with banking, driving under the influence, and decriminalization. If you live in Michigan, there's several bills moving there about medical taxes and caregiver restrictions. In New Jersey, you can take action on employee protections, tax exemptions, DUI, home cultivation, and even insurance coverage, which recently had a hearing. There's also legislation still pending in Ohio, and that has to do with legalization, autism, and letting doctors decide for their medical program. So since many sessions in many states are not occurring right now, I did want to let you know also at norml.org/act, at the top, you'll see our federal action alerts. There's about 5 or 6 that you can participate in, and you can just click there and send a message to your federal congressperson or a federal representative or senator, excuse me. And to that end, as we have mentioned, NORML has recently released our Smoke the Vote. So vote.norml.org will take you to where you can enter in your zip code, and it will pop up the legislators in your area and where they stand on the position. Recently, we work with VoteSmart on this platform. VoteSmart added most of the incumbents there to the platform, and so we have sent out surveys to them and have been entering their responses as we go. If you see someone who doesn't have a response yet and you have some quotes that they may have said, there is a link at the bottom where you can put that information and send it to us for approval. You can also learn about the ballot initiatives and referendum that I discussed earlier today by going to norml.org/election. And on the side, you'll see a button where you can click election news, and that'll cover all of the recent news having to do with the election. You can also check your voter registration there. Voter registration deadlines are approaching in many states in the upcoming weeks. So please make sure that you're registered to vote, especially if you are one of these states that are going to get to states and localities that are going to get to vote on cannabis issues. Lastly, NORML is one of the few consumer and patient-based advocacy organizations that really focus on these issues. And so I want to encourage you guys to go to norml.org/donate to support our mission, or norml.org/join to become a dues-paying member. And if you're really interested in being boots on the ground in your state, of course, you can go to norml.org/chapters, see if there's a chapter in your area and connect with them. If there's not, there's even a link that you can follow to create your own chapter there. So a few helpful hints for you guys coming up on the elections. I just really want to emphasize, make sure you are registered to vote. Now is the time to get online, check your voter registration, and make sure it's current so that you can vote on these issues and vote for cannabis-friendly candidates when the ballot is up for both early voting and November 11th. I'm going to see real quick if there's any last questions over here before we call it a day. We've got some people from Ohio. Miriam, there is some legislation moving in your state, so you can participate there. All right. I think I've touched on the states you guys have mentioned here and your questions. So one last thing that I'll share for any of you guys that are watching in Texas is that tomorrow is going to be the big Texas NORML Veteran Golf Benefit. We call it the Putt and Puff, and we host it at Willie Nelson's golf course out in Spicewood Springs. We're going to have 6 bands. We've got 24+ vendors that'll be there, food, glass blowing, in addition to 2 tee times for our golfers. We're also going to have a disc golf course in the back of the event. So I hope that you guys will join us. At this point, tickets are only going to be available at the door, and you can find out all of the information about this event on our website at texasnormal.org. I hope that I will see you guys out there. We've got a couple hundred people that have already pre-purchased tickets, and we are really excited because, you know, we were looking at doing it on April 4th of 2020, and unfortunately, the shutdown happened just weeks beforehand, and this is going to be the first opportunity for us to host this event since the pandemic started those 2.5 years ago. So we are super excited to see everybody out there at Willie Nelson's golf course. So until next week, I hope that y'all have a wonderful weekend, and make sure that you participate in those federal action alerts at norml.org/act. So thanks everybody. Until next time, have a great day.